After 42 months of grueling fighting in Ukraine, Russia's stocks of modern armored vehicles are low. So low, in fact, that Russian technicians are pulling out of long-term storage derelict tanks that, until now, were widely considered unfit for combat. Closely inspecting recent satellite imagery of Uralvagon Zavod, the sprawling Russian tank plant in Nizhny Tagil, 1,600 kilometers from Ukraine, open-source analyst Jumpy spotted something he'd long anticipated as Russian tank losses exceeded 4,000 earlier this year. Euromaidan Press says that's as many tanks as Russia had in front-line service before widening its war on Ukraine in February 2022. Just like that, there are a lot of likely T-72As parked in the yards outside UVZ now, Jumpy wrote, using the abbreviation for Uralvagon Zavod. When tanks appear outside Uralvagon Zavod, it's usually because they're gradually being brought inside the factory for refurbishment and possibly upgrade before being shipped off to front-line regiments, including those fighting in Ukraine. The 46-ton, 3-person T-72A isn't the oldest T-72 variant, but it's close. Just one model of the T-72, the Ural, preceded the T-72 into Soviet service in the early 1970s. Russian industry produces thousands of T-72 Urals and T-72As, but the much-improved T-72B, with a stabilized 125mm gun, thicker armor, and a more powerful engine, succeeded it in the 1980s. Euromaidan Press reports the older T-72s went into storage at bases such as the 349th Tank Storage Base in Russia's Topchikinsky district, 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine, and there they remained for decades, useful only as sources of spare parts, until Ukrainian mines, artillery, missiles and drones wiped out entire generation of more modern tanks. With Uralvagon Zavod building just 300 or so of the latest T-90M tanks annually, the Kremlin has had little choice but to dip into stocks of very old T-72s in order to partially replace its tank losses in Ukraine. The 40-year-old T-72Bs began arriving at Uralvagon Zavod by the dozens earlier this year, but there were just a few hundred T-72Bs in storage. There are around 1,000 T-72 Urals and T-72As. As recently as last summer, HIMARS, another open-source analyst, concluded the first generation of T-72s weren't of much use, as long as Russia still had some of the slightly newer T-80BVs and T-72Bs in storage. I expect that at some point they will have to create an upgrade program for these tanks. HIMARS wrote about the T-72As. That should be a sign that there aren't many T-72B, T-80B/BV left in storage. The sign has appeared. The T-72Bs and other 1980s vintage tanks are running out. Now it's the T-72A's turn to fight in Ukraine on those increasingly rare occasions when the Russians risk tanks along the drone-patrolled front line. Euromaidan Press says, how many of the 1,000 or so rusty early model T-72s are still repairable after decades in open storage is unclear. It's equally unclear how much Russia will invest in their refurbishment and upgrade. The T-72As lack many of the features that makes a modern tank modern, in particular stabilized main guns that are accurate, even when a tank is moving. Ukraine's oldest frontline tanks, its Leopard 1A5s, were last upgraded in the 1980s, but even they have stabilized guns. These days, Russian regiments in Ukraine mostly attack on motorcycles or on foot. They suffer heavy losses, usually totaling more than 20,000 killed and wounded a month. But with generous signing bonuses and deceptive contracts, the Kremlin manages to recruit 30,000 fresh troops a month. They fight without modern tanks, but they still fight, and they can still push back Ukraine's own manpower-starved brigades. As reported, Ukrainian special forces carried out a special operation in Sumy region, during which more than 330 Russian soldiers were killed. Fighters of the elite unit Timur penetrated enemy positions in the rear and eliminated dozens of occupiers in close combat, as well as with the help of coordinated drone and artillery strikes, writes The Telegraph. The exact date or location of the battle remains unknown, but Russia's offensive in the Sumy region has stalled in recent weeks, the media reported. Intercepted radio communications showed panic among Russian soldiers, who refused to attack Ukrainian positions, citing far-fetched reasons. HUR said the operation disrupted Russian supplies of food and ammunition. The action was carried out by the forces of the Chimera, Yunga, Stugna, Siberian Battalion, Arata, 1514, Paragon, Art Division, 1st Line, Raven Group, and 6th Special Operations Unit, which are part of the overall Timur Special Unit. The Russian offensive was supposedly aimed at creating a so-called buffer zone along Ukraine's northeastern border. Ukraine claims it has managed to stop the Russian advance and even recapture several settlements. But a military blogger from the Russian Federation, with the call sign Saverny, according to journalists, reported that Russian forces were surrounded in the Oleskievka area of Sumy Oblast. He wrote, "They have us pinned down. There is water on 3 sides and Ukrainians on the 4th. Russian forces entered the Sumy Oblast earlier this year after recapturing most of the neighboring Kursk Oblast in Russia. They aimed to carve out a buffer zone along Ukraine's northeastern border. Ukraine claimed to have halted the Russian advance and even to have recaptured some villages." Severny, a Russian military blogger, wrote on Monday that Moscow's forces had been surrounded in the Oleksievka area of the region. He said, "They have us trapped. Water on 3 sides and Ukrainians on the 4th. The elite Timur unit is an umbrella command within HUR that coordinates a number of specialized forces. The group takes its name from its leader, Lieutenant Colonel Timur, who planted a Ukrainian flag in Crimea for the first time in 10 years in a special operation in August 2024. In March 2024, the Wall Street Journal reported that HUR operators from the Timur unit were actively fighting Russian aligned forces in Sudan.